This weekend, it's the March for Our Lives. Will it be the peak of recent gun control protests or the start of something more? It was a dirty job, but someone had to do it. Now the county of San Diego says it's being overbilled for Hep A cleanup. And 15 years after shock and awe, the U.S. is still in Iraq. A look back with those who covered the invasion. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Megan Burks, education reporter for KPBS News, watchdog reporter Jeff McDonald of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Steve Walsh, military reporter for KPBS, and Tony Perry, former reporter with the Los Angeles Times. Well, gun control advocates will march tomorrow in San Diego and some 800 cities across America. The event March for Our Lives grew from the shooting in the school in Parkland, Florida, where 14 students and 3 staff members were murdered by a deeply troubled ex-student with an assault weapon. Such marches are not new. But Megan, this renewed movement here with these high school students, it does feel different. And what have you seen in San Diego campuses in recent weeks regarding protests?
Well, students really mobilized right after the announcement that there would be this March for Our Lives, as well as a walkout earlier this month. So they started getting together, planning their walkouts. For the students that I spoke with, it was very student-oriented, student-organized. They most had the blessing from their administration, but the administration was pretty hands-off. And I mean, I've been getting phone calls from students pitching me the stories. I have a little handwritten press release here from a student. So the students are really mobilized, taking this very seriously, and you know they're saying we basically seniors now were born in 1999 or 2000, so 1999 was Columbine. So they're saying, you know, this is the issue that has defined our childhood so far. So they want to take a stand. Been
with them their whole lives. So it's hard to know, but how big might tomorrow's marches be? Could they rival those women's marches of the first weekend that Trump was inaugurated? We had tens of thousands of marchers here alone.
So right now, the Facebook invitation for the downtown march has 6,000 RSVPs and 11,000 people who are interested. The second women's march, which ended up being about the same size as that first women's march when Trump was inaugurated, had 10,000 RSVPs. So it could rival. It's a little bit lower, but I think that there will probably be a good turnout.
Okay, and we should note there are also some marches planned or events in Escondido and Encinitas this weekend at least. So the high school students, you think they'll be at the forefront of the March for Our Lives events here?
Yeah, I've been kind of watching the organizing from afar. There are some college students. We spoke with them today on KPBS Midday Edition who are helping to organize. But there was also some meetings where they were trying to get students from throughout the county to come and help with the planning. And like I said, I mean, this is a press release from a high school student named Tess. And she says, you know, she's helping to organize the March for Our Lives.
That might catch an editor's eye more than the stuff that the mill that churns it out.
Yeah,
constantly.
I mean, it's my favorite press release I've ever received.
It's in pencil, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in pencil.
You got to love it. Well, as you say, you did cover a number of protesters here since the Valentine's Day shooting down there in Parkland, Florida. And we have a bite from a recent protest there. One of the students at Patrick Henry High in San Diego. Set that up for us.
Yeah, it's Ashley Watson, and she's a senior, and she is one of about 10 students there who really, on their own, planned this walkout. So let's hear.
All right, let's hear that.
To our government, the adults who are supposed to be working together to protect us, you have allowed the cycle to continue long enough. If you fail to do your duty to protect us, we will do everything we can do to protect each other. We didn't come this far to only come this far. We came this far to demand change. We came this far because we are strong, powerful, fearless.
All right, and Megan, we've had several local gun-related incidents at area schools since the Parkland shooting. What went on there?
There have been several reports of threats or possible threats, which is pretty common after there's a school shooting. So law enforcement is not surprised, but they are taking every threat seriously. I'm getting some kind of conflicting numbers. We heard today from San Diego Unified Police that they've investigated 49 threats. I don't know if those are 49 threats or 49 calls of caution. The DA said earlier this week that they'd investigated 19 threats countywide, and they've made 11 arrests. And those are arrests for making a criminal threat.
All right, now I want to open to the panel. Tony, is there a change in how the media has reported this youth-led response to the Parkland shooting? I mean, the outcry we saw after the horrible tragedy at Sandy Hook 5 years ago. You had the President of the United States running a full-court press on that, and nothing much came of it.
Yeah, this is unique. I think, as Megan suggests, there's been a cumulative aspect to this, but also the kids themselves, these teenagers from Parkland, are just amazing. They're articulate. They know social media. They've grown up with it. They are great interview subjects, be it television. I heard one on NPR just this morning. I was wowed. And they're persistent. So, and the whole aspect of a children's crusade, of course, has a better news hook, I'm afraid to say, than after Sandy Hook, which was led by the adults because the kids were,
unfortunately, first graders.
Were so much. Now, will it result in change? We'll see. But it is impressive, and even in our reduced state, the media is all over it, as it should be.
Well, they're registering to vote, which I think is critical. My daughter's 17 and looking forward to voting for the first time this fall.
Right, and I happen to be talking with some local members of indivisible groups here just over last weekend, and that's one of their big pushes right now is to register people like your daughter, young people.
Yeah, there's going to be voter registration after the march on Saturday. That's really the big push because now you can pre-register in California.
Now the media always gets tagged with saying that we're somehow fomenting this, but have you run across any of these students who heard about this on Morning Edition or CNN? How are they doing this?
No, I mean, I have always covered kids, whether it be through education or through my City Heights beat, and they are impressive. Kids all across this county are impressive, and so whenever I hear that, I think I've never run into any of those kids.
How about a different viewpoint, though? Is that being representative? Is there going to be a pro-Second Amendment rally, counter-rally at all?
I'm not. I believe in some states there were prayer services that kind of countered these marches that were pro Second Amendment. I'm not sure if I've heard of that in San Diego.
Now, we have had, of course, there was a lot of cynicism. We had a segment on our show right after the Parkland shooting where the UT had, here's what Congress is going to do, and a blank editorial. The Boston Globe had a similar editorial on the front page there. But actually, the Republican-dominated legislature in Florida, maybe the last, of course, where the shooting was, but one of the last states you'd think would do some reform, they did enact a few reforms there, and the governor signed it, very conservative governor in Florida. And reform advocates got a little victory in the current budget deal. Tell us about that. Who's got the background on that? That was, well, I do. A CDC the Centers for Disease Control, they had been effectively blocked by Republicans in Congress for many years of putting money forth to study gun violence as a public health issue, and now they can again here.
And there's going to be a little bit of money for school safety, but nothing for arming teachers, which is what, of course, the president had called for.
Right.
Well, we'll see what connection they make with mental health. Now, we're in San Diego, where you and I were there, working for the San Diego Union during the great McDonald's massacre of '84, and James Huberty had called for a mental health appointment just hours earlier, and the county didn't think he was eligible that quickly, and he went and he killed, what's our figure, 22, at the McDonald's in San Ysidro. So that is still an issue. It doesn't mean an either or. You can have AR-15 ban and better mental health financing. We'll see how
there was a huge coalition of organizations, doctors, all kinds of professionals who signed on to this letter after the Parkland shooting saying, these are the 3 steps, and very high up there was counseling and school psychologists. And I think our educators know that that is a key deterrent, but when you look at budget cuts, you always see counselors cut. Counselors are sharing schools now, so that's one thing I hope to dig into eventually.
And what kind of media coverage you think this is going to get this weekend? I would imagine it's going to be a big national story across the country. Huh?
Yeah, I'll be there.
You'll be there for KPBS. Well, we've been looking forward to that and all the other reports on that. Well, we're going to move on. The Hepatitis A outbreak had become a crisis. Eventually, 20 people died. Hundreds were hospitalized. The deadly liver infection was centered in the homeless population, and sanitation was a key factor in its spread. San Diego City and county officials scrambled to hire a firm to power wash sidewalks where the homeless congregated. Now the firm faces accusations of overcharging. Jeff, it's a fascinating story here in this crisis that the local officials were dealing with. Tell us about this company that got this power washing contract.
It's a company out of suburban Boston in the East Coast called Clean Harbors. They build themselves as the largest eco-environmental cleaner in North America. They do business all over. And they have a number of divisions that do all sorts of services. So I think that when the city and the county were both looking for remediation type contracting, they turned to a shop they know could get the job done, and money wasn't necessarily the object. Now, the city's goal was to power wash the sidewalks and clean away the human waste that had been perpetuating the spread of the virus. The county was looking at homeless encampment removal because that was a place where the disease was also spreading. So the same company got contracts, but to perform different services. We requested the data right away, probably late last year or early this year, from the city with the idea of looking at how much the city was paying for this. And we didn't get the invoices and the documentation until a couple of weeks ago. It took 3 months or so. And the thing I noticed right away is that not only were they paying more than $80 an hour to these guys washing the sidewalks, they were paying overtime to and from the job site, and these workers were being bussed in or vanned in from Los Angeles, which seemed odd because there are a number of companies that can perform the same service that are local, that don't have to pay for that.
Now, was that part of the contract to pay that whole transportation time and all that?
It was part of the proposal, and the city approved it. When the county was, so this company, Clean Harbors, did a different service for the county, but they were a lot stricter enforcing and rejecting the billings for overtime work and a $179 a day per diem, which is basically just extra money you get for taking care of out-of-town people. And the county nixed all that, and every contract that the county reviewed, that received, they found overbillings and refused to pay them. The city did not do that at all. They say that they examined the invoices very carefully and paid every dollar they owed, and they were all per terms of the contract. The county said they got the contracts, reviewed the work, and disallowed what amounted to about 25% of the billings that this company submitted.
Any indication
Tony?
that this company did a bad job, either for the city or for the county, a shoddy job, and now they're in the business of gouging the county, or did they do an adequate job?
I didn't hear that they performed inadequately from anybody, except some of the competitors thought that it was cursory work that the billing was much too high for, but the actual work performed was adequate. The folks I talked to, and it took me a long time to get the rival companies to go on the record because they don't want to be retaliated against by local governments, and they want to protect their ability to do government work in the future. So they didn't want to criticize too much, but a couple of guys told me on the record that they would have loved an opportunity to compete for the work.
This was a no-bid. These were no-bid contracts.
These were emergency, no-bid contracts, and both of them were $1 million plus.
So aren't there San Diego companies who could have come in and done this power washing on the sidewalks?
Yes. To hear them tell it, they were not given the opportunity to bid. The city's answer was that they did an e-notification on I think it was a Monday night, and gave everybody till Wednesday afternoon to respond. These aren't, I don't want to say they're not sophisticated vendors, but a lot of them didn't respond. They only got 5 responses, and the city chose its preferred vendor by within days because the contract went out like September 6th, came back on September 8th, and Clean Harbors' first billing cycle was September 11th. So this happened in lockstep.
When they issue a fairly large contract like this, no bid contract, really important, the hepatitis epidemic, et cetera, doesn't the city or the county, when they do this, have someone who goes out and watches how they're doing, or signs off, yeah, that's doing a pretty good job here, or says, no, hey, why don't you do this?
Yes,
they follow the time. Yeah.
They both have oversight capability and responsibility. To hear them tell it, both shops, the county and the city, did a good job watching and monitoring. The county would tell you they were very diligent, rejecting the overbilling costs. The city said they were just as diligent, they just didn't find any overbilling. Yet they did pay a number, like more than $100,000 in costs that the county said we're not covering.
Where's it go now? I mean, is there an appeal, lawsuits, or whatever?
No appeals, no lawsuits. These are temporary contracts that are due to expire very soon, and both the city and the county have issued requests for proposals for longer-term agreements that are out to bid right now, and they'll be awarding more permanent, like up to 5-year contracts.
So what's the lesson learned here? Did the county and the city simply need to coordinate, or did we just learn that the county has better bean counters than the city has?
The county was proud to have pointed out to me, I got the feeling they were waiting for someone to ask for the contract and say, look, these are all the overbillings we didn't pay. The city waited 3 months plus to supply the paperwork we got, so I'm not sure. They said they did all their due diligence and all their monitoring and everything was appropriate, but yet they did pay overtime, they paid per diem, and I had a number of local companies, more that would go on the record, that said they didn't get a chance to compete. They would have been able to do it for a lot less money.
Well, could this be because Kevin Faulconer, the mayor of the city of San Diego, his political career was sort of on the line in this issue? And so the city moved faster and looked and...
I think money was not an object when they were trying to clean the sidewalks, which is appropriate.
Yeah. Megan?
So I live pretty close to the homeless encampments downtown, and I mean, you can see it. I would step over feces to get into my car to drive to KPBS in the morning. So I think it was more urgent, both as a public health standpoint and because Faulconer's neck was on the line pretty much. I think when you're talking about the encampments near the river and the things that the county were taking on, that's more hidden from sight, so probably less urgent. But I think also, I think we're probably going to see a lot more collaboration between the city and the county as a result of this. I mean, there was issues getting those hand washing stations
We'll hope so.
out.
There was a lot of animosity between the two agencies in the run-up to the emergency declaration, which didn't come till September 1st.
Yeah.
And the first case was discovered more than a year ago.
Maybe we'll say there's a lot of lessons learned. We'll see where they go with that.
Before we leave this topic, I did want to ask Jeff, what was the response by Clean Harbor to these objections from the county?
Clean Harbors was not among the responsive bidders. They would have liked an opportunity to compete. I think they do the same work for the Downtown Partnership at a much lower rate. So I didn't interview that guy, but I did reach out to him. We did speak after the stories ran. It's an interesting situation. You don't want to fault the city for not being responsive. On the other hand, they also have to steward the money appropriately.
All right, well, we'll see what happens as we go forward, and hopefully that crisis is behind us. Well, the tangible costs of the Iraq War, launched 15 years ago this week, were horrific. Tens of thousands of Americans, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis wounded or killed, more than 1 million people displaced from their homes, multiple Iraq cities destroyed, at least $2 trillion in U.S. taxpayer dollars spent. And more debatable was the costly fallout, like the rise of ISIS, the string of wars across the Middle East, near constant terrorist attacks. What was won? Hard to say now, or even in 2003, when politicians of both parties cheered the run-up to the war, along with many media outlets, that there was anything to be won in the first place. But tasked with the fighting were the men and women of America's military, including thousands based in San Diego. And Tony, you saw firsthand exactly what was going on the battlefield over there. Tell us about your experience as a reporter for the Los Angeles Times. You went over multiple times to Iraq, did you not?
Yeah, I went 7 times to cover the Marines from Camp Pendleton, starting with the assault on Baghdad, and then I was there, I guess, average of 6 weeks every year, until my wife threatened to put my clothes on the sidewalk and I'd come home. Also 7 trips to Afghanistan, always with the Marines from Camp Pendleton. America goes to war. San Diego County, as it were, because of the Navy and the Marines, go to war. 352 Marines from Camp Pendleton killed, 115 from 29 Palms, which is really a branch off a city of Camp Pendleton, half a dozen from Miramar. You add all that up, and it's pushing, 500, and it would be second only to Fort Hood, the big Army base, which I think was like 511.
And those are killed, we're talking about many more wounded.
Yeah, and you multiply those killed in action by 8 to 10, and that's the folks who were physically injured, a lot of amputations and such. And then, of course, you add in TBI and PTSD, and we're talking, as you suggest, an enormous burden
And more than 3,400 American contractors which killed, which
yeah, that's a whole scandal in and of itself. Right. Our reliance on contractors, but then again, would you care for a draft? Exactly. With the teenagers that are going to be in the street on Saturday, would they like a draft? No. And their parents? Yeah. Probably not.
No. And Steve, I wanted to turn to you. You were also embedded in a different part of the country before you came to KPBS. Tell us about that.
Well, that's back in the days when I was a newspaper reporter. I was actually a reporter for a paper in Gary, Indiana. I went with the Indiana National Guard. Actually, I self-embedded during the first part of the war, got all the way up to Baghdad, and then came back again in 2005 around the time of the Battle of Tel Afar up in Mosul. To a very different war. The country at that point had been kind of plunged into chaos.
That's what I wanted to ask you. How did your experiences over time change in terms of the fighting folks and veterans that you've talked to since then and their perspectives? Let's start with Steve.
So it was kind of freeform. The first time I was there, I ended up, the National Guard, nobody really was paying a lot of attention to them, and one of the units they were guarding was Special Forces up in Baghdad. I came in the middle of the night on a C-130, watched them engineer the looting of a palace to prove to the people in the surrounding territory that Saddam's people were out of power. And they talked in terms of we'd be here less than a year and we'd be gone. So, you know, we didn't want to get permanent housing for any of the air traffic controllers or anything because they were going to put everybody in power and then we were going to be gone. Come back in 2005 and everyone is undercover at this point. The country had been essentially plunged into chaos. They were mortaring the bases constantly. They mortared the runway when I came in and mortared it again before I ended up leaving. It was the seeds of what would eventually become ISIS.
And Tony, how did you see it change over time?
Well, 2003, 2004, 2005, great success. Saddam was gone. They found him in his spider hole. His sons were captured. And the torture chamber that we had spent some time in was gone. Abu Ghraib, of course, was a scandal, but it went well. But as Steve suggested then, in about 2005, 6, 7, badly, and there were reasons for that. Part of it was that the Baghdad government was now run by Shias, and they had been oppressed by the Sunnis. They were now in charge. They're also big friends of the Iranians. And so they did their retribution, and suddenly things went bad. Now, in about 2007, the Marine Corps and the Army cut a deal with the tribes in Anbar, where the insurgency was based, and things got better because the tribes, well, they know how to kill people, among other things, but they are also very disciplined, and when the sheikh says fight, you fight. Things went well, 2008, 9, 10, and then in 2011, a new president, Barack Obama, who never supported the Iraq mission, and a vice president.
Along with the current president, he claims.
Joe Biden never supported the Iraq. In fact, Biden gave one speech, broke down in tears about it. And Maliki, the president of Iraq, wants the Americans out because he doesn't want anyone saying, you really have to be a president of all the people, not just of the Shias. Okay, so he doesn't really want Americans there. Obama sends Biden over to cut a deal. He doesn't succeed. The man who never supported the mission doesn't succeed in cutting a deal to allow American forces. So 2011, they all leave. Along comes ISIS, and things go straight to hell, and we have to go back later. And this is a repeat of 2003, 2004, where if you don't do it right the first time, whatever your aim is, you're going to have to go back or abandon it. And we've opted not to abandon it.
And maybe a repeat of Vietnam, as some people have pointed out. Steve, and your experience, and even talking to veterans now, this time, much time after the invasion.
When you talk to veterans, they mostly they look at their service and they honor what they did. They answered the country's call, and they defended their friends and their country as best they could. But ultimately, most people I talk to didn't understand even when I was there, why we were there in the first place. I mean, last year again, we declared victory in Mosul once again, and then we're pulling out everybody one more time.
Well, the Marines knew why they were there. On the eve, Jim Mattis, who was the commanding general of 1st Marine Division, now the Secretary of Defense, told the young Marines, this is your Guadalcanal. Well, that forget the geopolitics of today. When you're a Marine, you want to live up to the legacy. This is your Bella Wood.
So it's from a personal standpoint.
Absolutely. Now, you meet them now, and I've been to a number of the reunions and funerals. They're very proud of their military service, what they did, what they accomplished. But and they still mourn the loss of their buddies. They'll wear T-shirts with all the names of the dead. Well, in many cases, the T-shirt can't be big enough. But very alienated, I think, towards the civilian community that we just don't understand. Very alienated towards the political status. So I think the split between those who serve, 1%, and the 99% of us that go shopping is enormous and getting bigger.
Right. All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there, and a lot to read this week, and I encourage everybody to go to kpbs.org and other sites here to look at the 15th anniversary. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Megan Burke of KPBS News, Jeff McDonald of the San Diego Union Tribune, Steve Walsh of KPBS News, and Tony Perry, former reporter with the Los Angeles Times. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for being with us, and join us again next week on the Roundtable.